Sarah Mitchell was teaching her third student of the day how to execute a perfect crosswind landing when her phone buzzed with a message that would change everything. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but the voice on the other end identified himself as Colonel James Rodriguez from the Pentagon. He needed to see her immediately. Not tomorrow, not next week, today. And he couldn't tell her why over the phone. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning had started like any other Tuesday at Riverside Municipal Airport in Oregon. Sarah arrived at 6:30 a.m., 45 minutes before her first lesson, carrying her usual thermos of black coffee and a worn leather flight bag that had belonged to her father. At 32, she had been instructing for nearly 8 years, transforming nervous beginners into confident pilots one lesson at a time. The work was steady, predictable, and exactly what she needed after her military discharge 5 years earlier. Sarah's office sat in the corner of the flight school building, its windows offering a clear view of the runway where Cessna 172s and Piper Cherokees practiced touch and goes throughout the day. The walls were covered with sectional charts, weather reports, and photos of successful students on their solo flights. A small American flag stood on her desk next to a stack of logbooks waiting to be signed. Her first student that morning was Marcus Chun, a software engineer from Portland who drove down twice a week to chase his childhood dream of becoming a pilot. They spent an hour working on radio communications and traffic pattern procedures. Marcus still got nervous calling the tower, his voice cracking slightly when requesting takeoff clearance. But Sarah could see his confidence building with each flight. The second lesson involved emergency procedures with Jennifer Walsh, a nurse who wanted to fly medical supply runs for rural hospitals. They practiced simulated engine failures, forcing Jennifer to quickly identify suitable landing sites and execute the proper emergency checklist. Jennifer handled the pressure well, her medical training translating naturally to aviation's emphasis on systematic responses to crisis situations. It was during her break between students that Sarah received the call. She had been reviewing weather reports for the afternoon flights when her phone rang. The voice was professional, direct, and carried an unmistakable military bearing. "Ms. Mitchell, this is Colonel Rodriguez from the Department of Defense. I need to speak with you regarding a matter of national security. Can you be at Portland International Airport's main terminal in 2 hours?" Sarah felt her stomach tighten. She hadn't had contact with anyone from the military since her discharge. Her service record was clean, exemplary even, but something about the colonel's tone suggested this wasn't a social call. "Colonel, I'm in the middle of a workday. I have students scheduled, Ms. Mitchell. I understand this is inconvenient, but this is a priority situation. I've already spoken with your employer. Your afternoon flights have been covered." The line went quiet for a moment. Sarah stared out at the runway where a student pilot was practicing landings, the small aircraft bouncing slightly on touchdown before settling onto the asphalt. Everything looked normal, peaceful even, but nothing felt normal anymore. "What is this regarding, sir? I can't discuss details over an unsecured line." "Terminal B, Gate 12. Look for a man in a gray suit reading a newspaper." 2 hours, Miss Mitchell." The line went dead. Sarah set down her phone and walked to the window. Her hands were shaking slightly, a reaction she hadn't experienced since her last combat mission over Afghanistan. She had worked hard to build a quiet life after leaving the Air Force, choosing flight instruction specifically because it kept her in aviation without the stress and danger of military operations. She taught people to fly for recreation, for careers, for the simple joy of being airborne. It was honest work that let her sleep peacefully at night. But apparently, her past wasn't finished with her. Sarah's military service had been distinguished, but brief. She'd flown F-16 Fighting Falcons for 4 years, including 2 combat deployments to Afghanistan and 1 to Iraq. Her record showed 127 combat missions, 3 air medals, and a Distinguished Flying Cross for actions during a particularly dangerous close air support mission near Kandahar. She had been one of only 12 female F-16 pilots in the Air Force at the time, breaking barriers while trying to simply do her job. The discharge had been her choice, though not an easy one. After witnessing too many friends lost to enemy fire and mechanical failures, Sarah decided she wanted to fly without the constant threat of death. She wanted to help people discover the joy of aviation rather than use it as a weapon. The transition to civilian life had been difficult initially, but she'd found peace in teaching others to navigate the same skies she'd once defended. Someone from the Pentagon wanted to see her, and that peaceful chapter of her life suddenly felt very fragile. Sarah called her boss, Frank Morrison, who owned the flight school. Frank was a former airline pilot who'd started the school after mandatory retirement at 65. He was understanding but clearly curious about the mysterious call that had resulted in her afternoon cancellations. "Everything all right, Sarah?" The guy who called sounded pretty official. "I honestly don't know, Frank. Hopefully it's just some paperwork issue from my discharge. I should be back tomorrow morning for the usual schedule. Take whatever time you need. And Sarah, be careful." Frank's concern was evident in his voice. He'd been in aviation long enough to know that unexpected calls from government officials rarely brought good news. Sarah drove to Portland International in her pickup truck, a reliable Ford that had served her well during her civilian years. The highway stretched ahead through Oregon's green landscape, but she barely noticed the scenery. Her mind was racing through possibilities, trying to understand what the Pentagon could want with a flight instructor from a small municipal airport during her military service. Sarah had been cleared for classified information due to her combat role, but that clearance had expired with her discharge. She'd never been involved in intelligence operations or special programs beyond her fighter pilot duties. Her expertise was in air-to-air combat, close air support, and standard fighter tactic skills that seemed irrelevant to current military needs. The drive took 90 minutes, giving her plenty of time to worry. Sarah found herself checking her rearview mirror more frequently than usual, though she couldn't say why. Paranoia, perhaps, or just the natural anxiety that came with unexpected summons from powerful government agencies. Portland International was busy with afternoon travelers when Sarah arrived. She found parking in the short-term garage and made her way to Terminal B. Gate 12 was near the end of the concourse, past shops selling Oregon coffee and local crafts to tourists. The man in the gray suit was exactly where Colonel Rodriguez had said he'd be. He was reading the Wall Street Journal and wearing aviator sunglasses despite being indoors. Sarah approached cautiously. "Colonel Rodriguez?" The man looked up and nodded. He was probably in his early 50s, with graying hair and the posture of someone accustomed to command. His handshake was firm, professional. "Miss Mitchell, thank you for coming on short notice. Shall we find somewhere more private to talk?" They walked to a quiet corner of the terminal, where a few empty chairs faced the windows overlooking the runway. Sarah watched a United Airlines 737 push back from the gate as the colonel opened a manila folder. "Miss Mitchell, I'm going to be direct with you. The Department of Defense has a situation that requires your specific skills and experience. Before I continue, I need you to understand that everything I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "Sir, my security clearance expired years ago. We're aware of that. If you agree to hear what I have to say, you'll be read back into a compartmentalized program on a temporary basis. But once you hear this briefing, you're committed to secrecy regardless of whether you accept our proposal." The colonel's words hung in the air between them. Sarah watched another aircraft taxi toward the runway, its engines creating heat shimmer in the afternoon sun. She thought about her students, her quiet life, the peace she'd worked so hard to achieve. What kind of situation? The kind that could determine whether American forces come home alive from their next mission. The kind that requires someone with your unique combination of skills, experience, and psychological profile. Sarah turned to face the colonel directly. His expression was serious, even grave. Whatever this was about, it wasn't routine military business. I need to know more before I can agree to anything. Colonel Rodriguez nodded and pulled out a photograph from his folder. It showed what appeared to be a military aircraft, but unlike anything Sarah had ever seen. The design was angular, almost alien-looking, with surfaces that seemed to bend light around them. Ms. Mitchell, what you're looking at is the most advanced stealth aircraft ever built. It's been in development for 15 years at a cost of over $40 billion. 3 weeks ago, something went wrong during a test flight, and now we have a problem that threatens not just the program, but American air superiority for the next generation. Sarah studied the photograph. The aircraft looked like something from a science fiction movie, its design so radical that it barely resembled conventional fighter jets. But she could see the careful engineering in its lines, the deliberate shaping. That would make it nearly invisible to radar. What happened during the test flight? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The aircraft didn't return to base. We lost contact approximately 200 miles into the mission profile. Search and rescue found no wreckage, no debris field, nothing. It simply vanished. Mechanical failure? Pilot error? Colonel Rodriguez shook his head. The pilot was one of our best test pilots, a former Thunderbird leader with over 4,000 flight hours. The aircraft had passed every systems check. The weather was perfect. There was no reason for anything to go wrong. Sarah felt a chill. Despite the warm terminal air, you think it was shot down? We don't know. But we do know that the aircraft contains technology that cannot, under any circumstances, fall into hostile hands. The radar-defeating capabilities alone would render our entire air defense network obsolete overnight. The flight systems incorporate artificial intelligence that could revolutionize military aviation or be turned against us if compromised. The colonel paused, letting the implications sink in. Sarah understood immediately. If the aircraft had been captured intact, it represented the greatest intelligence loss in American military history. What does this have to do with me? I flew F-16s, not experimental aircraft. Because, Miss Mitchell, we believe the aircraft is still operational. And we need someone to fly a recovery mission unlike anything attempted before. Colonel Rodriguez pulled out another photograph. This one showed Sarah herself in her Air Force flight suit, standing next to an F-16 with her helmet under her arm. She remembered the day it was taken, just before her final combat mission in Afghanistan. Your service record shows exceptional performance in high-stress situations. You've successfully completed missions behind enemy lines, demonstrated remarkable adaptability under fire, and maintained operational security even when facing capture. Most importantly, your psychological evaluations indicate you can handle isolation and uncertainty better than 98% of combat pilots. Sarah stared at her younger self in the photograph. That woman had been confident, eager to prove herself in a male-dominated field, ready to take on any challenge the Air Force could offer. The woman sitting in the airport terminal had deliberately chosen a different path. Colonel, I appreciate the confidence, but I haven't flown military aircraft in 5 years. I teach Cessnas and Pipers to weekend pilots. Whatever mission you have in mind, there are active duty pilots far better qualified. Under normal circumstances, you'd be absolutely right. But these aren't normal circumstances. Colonel Rodriguez leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Ms. Mitchell, the missing aircraft was last detected heading toward the Bermuda Triangle. The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything Sarah thought she knew about reality. The Bermuda Triangle. She'd heard the stories of course ships and planes disappearing without explanation, compasses spinning wildly, electronic equipment failing for no apparent reason. But those were tales told by conspiracy theorists and sensationalist documentaries, not briefings from Pentagon colonels. Sir, with all due respect, the Bermuda Triangle is a myth. It's a heavily trafficked shipping lane where accidents happen due to weather and human error, nothing more. Colonel Rodriguez reached into his folder again and withdrew a tablet computer. The screen displayed what appeared to be satellite imagery, timestamped from 3 weeks earlier. Sarah could see the distinctive outline of the stealth aircraft moving across the display in real-time tracking. This is footage from our most advanced surveillance satellite. Watch the timestamp carefully. Sarah leaned in as the colonel pressed play. The aircraft moved steadily across the screen, its trajectory taking it southeast over the Atlantic. Then, at precisely 14 hours 47 minutes and 33 seconds, something extraordinary happened. The aircraft's signature began to distort, wavering like heat shimmer before vanishing completely from the display. Equipment malfunction? Sarah asked, though her voice lacked conviction. We thought so initially, but look at this. The colonel switched to a different view, this one from a Navy destroyer positioned 180 miles away. The ship's advanced radar systems showed the same phenomenon, the aircraft's return growing increasingly erratic before disappearing entirely. Two independent tracking systems don't fail simultaneously in exactly the same way, Ms. Mitchell. Something in that region interfered with our most sophisticated surveillance technology. Sarah studied the data, her analytical mind working through the possibilities. During her military service, she'd encountered plenty of electronic warfare scenarios, but nothing that could make an aircraft simply vanish from multiple tracking systems. What's the official position on this? Officially? The aircraft suffered a catastrophic systems failure and crashed into the Atlantic. The wreckage sank to depths that made recovery impossible. Case closed. And unofficially? Colonel Rodriguez powered down the tablet and returned it to his folder. Unofficially, we have a $40 billion aircraft with our most classified technology sitting somewhere it shouldn't be, possibly in the hands of people who shouldn't have it. Sarah watched passengers hurrying past their corner of the terminal. Ordinary people dealing with delayed flights and lost luggage. Their problem seemed refreshingly simple compared to the colonel's revelation. Assuming I believe what you're telling me, and I'm not saying I do, what exactly would this recovery mission involve? We've developed a modified version of the stealth aircraft, designated X-47 Delta. It incorporates lessons learned from the missing prototype and includes additional shielding against electromagnetic interference. The mission would require flying into the same region where contact was lost and attempting to locate the original aircraft. Alone? The X-47 Delta is a single-seat aircraft. Long-range fuel capacity, advanced navigation systems, and communication equipment designed to maintain contact even under adverse conditions. The mission profile calls for a systematic search pattern covering approximately 50,000 square miles of ocean. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. She'd flown plenty of solo missions during her Air Force career, but never over open ocean in an experimental aircraft searching for something that might not even exist. Colonel, I have to ask, if this is such a critical mission, why not send an active duty pilot? Someone current on military systems and procedures? The colonel's expression grew even more serious. Because everyone we've sent to investigate this area has experienced the same phenomenon. Communications blackouts, navigation equipment failures, disorientation. 3 reconnaissance flights have returned with pilots reporting significant memory gaps and psychological effects. What kind of psychological effects? Confusion, time distortion, vivid hallucinations. One pilot insisted he'd been airborne for 8 hours when his fuel consumption indicated only 2 hours of flight time. Another claimed he'd encountered aircraft from World War II, still engaged in combat missions. Sarah stared at the colonel. The rational part of her mind rejected what she was hearing as impossible, but her military training taught her to evaluate threats based on evidence rather than preconceptions. And you think I'd be immune to these effects? Not immune, but better equipped to handle them. Your psychological profile indicates exceptional resistance to disorientation and stress-induced hallucinations. More importantly, your combat experience includes situations where reality itself seemed to break down. The colonel was referring to her final mission in Afghanistan, Sarah realized. The one that had ultimately led to her decision to leave the military. She'd never discussed the details with anyone outside her immediate chain of command, but apparently her official reports had been more revealing than she'd intended. That mission had involved close air support for a special forces team, pinned down in a mountain valley. What should have been a routine strike had turned into 6 hours of continuous combat in conditions that defied explanation. Radio communications had been intermittent. Her navigation systems had malfunctioned repeatedly, and she'd encountered weather phenomena that didn't appear on any meteorological reports. By the time she'd returned to base, Sarah had expended all her ordnance, pushed her aircraft beyond its operational limits, and somehow managed to keep the ground team alive through what intelligence later described as anomalous atmospheric conditions. She'd received the Distinguished Flying Cross for that mission, but the experience had shaken her confidence in ways that awards couldn't address. I remember reading your after-action report, Colonel Rodriguez continued. You maintained operational effectiveness despite equipment failures, communications blackouts, and conditions that left other pilots unable to complete their missions. That's exactly the kind of adaptability we need for this operation. Sarah turned to watch the runway through the terminal windows. A Southwest Airlines 737 was taking off, climbing steadily into the afternoon sky with its cargo of business travelers and vacationers. Normal people go to normal places for normal reasons. What happened to the test pilot of the original aircraft? Captain Rebecca Torres. 15 years of military flying, including 5 years as a test pilot. One of the most experienced aviators in the program. Colonel Rodriguez produced another photograph, this one showing a woman in a flight suit standing next to what Sarah assumed was the missing stealth aircraft. Captain Torres looked confident, professional, every inch the elite test pilot. No trace of her either? None, but we have reason to believe she might still be alive. Sarah felt a chill. What kind of reason? The colonel hesitated for the first time since their conversation began. When he spoke again, his voice carried a note of uncertainty that made his previous statements seem even more ominous. 4 days ago, we received a transmission on an emergency frequency. The signal was heavily distorted, but our analysis indicates it originated from the same region where contact was lost. The voice pattern matches Captain Torres. What did the transmission say? Still alive, aircraft intact. Cannot return. Do not send rescue. Then the signal was cut out. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. A pilot trapped somewhere in the Bermuda Triangle with a $40 billion aircraft, unable to return for unknown reasons. It sounded like the premise of a bad science fiction movie, but the colonel's expression suggested he was deadly serious. That could have been anyone. Voice analysis isn't infallible. We thought so too, until we ran the transmission through enhanced filtering. There was background noise on the signal aircraft engines, electronic systems, radio chatter. The engine signature matches the missing stealth aircraft exactly. Sarah stood up and walked to the window, needing a moment to process everything she'd heard. The logical part of her mind insisted this was all elaborate fiction, But her military training recognized the weight of classified briefings and urgent requests from Pentagon officials. "Colonel, assuming for a moment that I believe everything you've told me, what makes you think I could succeed where others have failed?" "Because you're not in the active duty military. You don't think like a military pilot anymore. You think like a civilian flight instructor. That different perspective might be exactly what's needed to navigate whatever's happening in that region." Sarah turned back to face him. "And if I refuse? Then we'll find someone else." "But Ms. Mitchell, I've reviewed the files of every qualified pilot in the military. You're our best option for bringing Captain Torres home and recovering technology. That could change the balance of world power." The weight of that responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders like a familiar burden. During her military career, she carried the lives of ground troops, the success of critical missions, the safety of fellow pilots. She'd thought those days were behind her, but apparently the universe had other plans. "I need to know more about the aircraft I'd be flying. Specifications, capabilities, limitations." Colonel Rodriguez smiled for the first time since their meeting began. "Does that mean you're considering the mission?" "It means I'm not stupid enough to make a decision without understanding what I'd be getting into." The colonel opened his folder again and withdrew a thick manual bound in black leather. The cover bore no identification markings, but Sarah recognized the format of classified technical documentation. X-47 Delta specifications and operating procedures. You'll have 48 hours to review the material and make your decision. If you agree to the mission, training begins immediately at a facility in Nevada. Sarah accepted the manual, surprised by its weight. Whatever the X-47 Delta was, it represented significantly more complexity than the F-16S she'd flown during her military career. How long would the training take? 2 weeks of intensive simulation and systems familiarization, followed by 3 days of actual flight testing. The aircraft incorporates some revolutionary technology that will require significant adjustment, even for experienced pilots. What kind of revolutionary technology? Colonel Rodriguez glanced around the terminal, ensuring no one was within earshot of their conversation. Neural interface systems that respond to pilot thoughts as well as physical controls. Adaptive camouflage that changes the aircraft's visual signature in real time. Propulsion technology that, well, let's just say it makes conventional jet engines look primitive. Sarah felt another chill. She'd heard rumors during her military service about experimental aircraft that pushed the boundaries of known physics, but she'd always assumed they were just that rumors spread by bored pilots with active imaginations. "And you want me to fly something like that into a region known for making aircraft disappear? Ms. Mitchell, I won't lie to you. This mission carries significant risks. But if we don't recover that technology, the consequences for American security could be catastrophic. Other nations are developing their own stealth capabilities, and the prototype contains advances that could give them a decisive advantage." Sarah thought about her students back at Riverside Municipal Airport. Marcus Chun, still nervous about radio calls, but determined to earn his pilot's license. Jennifer Walsh, planning to use her flying skills to help rural hospitals. Frank Morrison, who'd built a flight school to share his love of aviation with the next generation. They all lived in a world where the greatest aviation risks involved weather, mechanical problems, and pilot error. They didn't worry about experimental aircraft disappearing into mysterious regions or technology that could shift the balance of global power, but someone had to worry about those things. Someone had to take the risks that allowed others to live peaceful lives, to pursue normal dreams, to teach weekend pilots without fear of foreign invasion or technological domination. Sarah had chosen to leave that responsibility behind when she left the military. But apparently, that responsibility wasn't finished with her. "Colonel, I need to ask you something, and I want a straight answer." "Of course." Do you really believe Captain Torres is still alive? Colonel Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the runway where another aircraft was preparing for takeoff. Ms. Mitchell, 3 weeks ago, I would have said it was impossible. But I've seen the evidence, heard the transmission, reviewed the data from multiple sources. Something extraordinary is happening in that region, something that challenges everything we think we know about physics and reality. He turned to meet her eyes directly. Whether Captain Torres is alive or dead, whether the aircraft is recoverable, or lost forever, we have to try. Because if we don't, and that technology ends up in the wrong hands, the consequences will be far worse than losing one pilot and one aircraft. Sarah drove back to Riverside in silence, the classified manual sitting on her passenger seat like a physical manifestation of the choice she faced. The familiar Oregon landscape rolled past her windows, but her mind was thousands of miles away, hovering over an expanse of Atlantic Ocean where reality apparently operated by different rules. The flight school was quiet when she arrived. Frank had locked up for the evening, leaving only the security lights to illuminate the hangar where a dozen small aircraft sat waiting for tomorrow's lessons. Sarah sat in her truck for several minutes, staring at the Cessna 172 she'd flown that morning with Marcus Chen 8 hours ago. Her biggest concern had been helping a nervous software engineer master crosswind landings. Her apartment was a modest 2-bedroom unit overlooking the Willamette River, furnished with the practical simplicity of someone who'd learned to travel light during military deployments. Sarah made herself a cup of tea and settled into her reading chair with the classified manual. The first page bore a stern warning about unauthorized disclosure, followed by clearance requirements that technically didn't apply to her anymore. The X-47 Delta was unlike anything in the conventional military inventory. The technical specifications read more like science fiction than aerospace engineering. Maximum altitude, 80,000 feet. Range, 4,000 nautical miles without refueling. Top speed, classified, but the propulsion system diagram suggested capabilities far beyond traditional jet engines. But it was the neural interface technology that truly set the aircraft apart. According to the documentation, the pilot's brainwaves would be monitored and interpreted by an artificial intelligence system, allowing thought-controlled flight operations in addition to traditional manual controls. The system could anticipate pilot intentions, compensate for human limitations, and maintain optimal performance even under extreme stress conditions. Sarah had flown fly-by-wire aircraft before, but nothing approaching this level of integration between human and machine. The manual warned that initial adaptation could cause disorientation, headaches, and temporary memory gaps as the pilot's brain learned to interface with the system. The adaptive camouflage technology was equally revolutionary. Thousands of microscopic cells embedded in the aircraft's skin could change color and pattern to match surrounding conditions, making visual detection nearly impossible even at close range. Combined with the radar-defeating stealth design, the X-47 Delta would be virtually invisible to conventional detection methods. The propulsion system documentation was heavily redacted, but the remaining text suggested some form of electromagnetic field manipulation rather than traditional combustion engines. Performance charts indicated the aircraft could accelerate, decelerate, and maneuver in ways that defied conventional aerodynamics. Sarah closed the manual and walked to her kitchen window, which offered a view of the airport where her old life waited. Tomorrow morning, Marcus Chun would arrive for his lesson, eager to practice the radio procedures they'd worked on today. Jennifer Walsh would continue preparing for her medical supply missions. Frank would grumble about FAA paperwork, while secretly enjoying every moment of helping new pilots discover the joy of flight. It was a good life, a peaceful life, exactly what she'd wanted after leaving the military. But somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean, Captain Rebecca Torres was trapped with technology that could reshape global power structures. And for reasons Sarah didn't fully understand, the Pentagon believed she was the only person who could bring both the pilot and the aircraft. Home. Her phone rang at 11 p.m. Sarah recognized Colonel Rodriguez's number. "Ms. Mitchell, I know it's late, but we've received another transmission." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "From Captain Torres?" "We believe so. This one was clearer than the first. I'm sending you an encrypted audio file. You'll need to view it on the tablet I left in your truck." Sarah realized she hadn't noticed the tablet when she'd retrieved the manual. She found it wedged under the passenger seat, a military-grade device that powered on with her thumbprint. The audio file was brief but chilling. A woman's voice, strained but recognizable as the same person from the photographs. Colonel Rodriguez had shown her. Day 21. "Still alive. Aircraft are functional. Unable to return due to the temporal displacement field. Recommend immediate halt to all recovery attempts. Repeat, do not send anyone else. The field is expanding." The transmission cut to static, then silenced. Sarah replayed the message 3 times, analyzing the background sounds. She could hear what sounded like aircraft systems, electronic humming, and something else, a low-frequency pulse that seemed to rhythm with the static bursts. Her phone rang again, immediately. "What's your assessment, Ms. Mitchell?" "If that's really Captain Torres, she's been missing for 3 weeks but claims it's been 21 days. That's consistent with the time distortion effects you mentioned. What else did you notice?" Sarah hesitated, unsure if her observation was relevant. "There's a rhythmic pulse in the background. It doesn't sound like normal radio interference." Our analysts noted the same thing. Frequency analysis suggests it's some form of electromagnetic resonance, possibly natural in origin. We've never encountered anything like it. "Colonel, what did she mean by temporal displacement field?" "That single quotes S. complicated. Our theoretical physics team believes it might refer to a localized distortion in spacetime, possibly caused by unknown magnetic or gravitational anomalies in the region." Sarah sat down heavily in her kitchen chair. During her military career, she dealt with enemy fire, mechanical failures, and weather emergencies. But time distortion and electromagnetic anomalies were beyond anything in her experience or training. And the comment about the field expanding? If Captain Torres is correct, the phenomenon that trapped her is growing larger. That could affect shipping lanes, commercial aviation routes, even coastal areas. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. If the mysterious field continued expanding, it could eventually threaten major population centers along the eastern seaboard. Disappearance of one military aircraft would become the least of their concerns. "Colonel, I need to know something. Why hasn't this been turned over to NASA or civilian research institutions? They have better resources for studying unusual phenomena." "Because the missing aircraft contains classified military technology that cannot be compromised under any circumstances. If civilian researchers became involved, we'd lose control of the information and potentially expose capabilities that could be exploited by hostile nations." Sarah understood the logic, but it meant the military was essentially flying blind into a phenomenon they didn't understand using methods they'd never tested. It was the kind of mission profile that turned experienced pilots into casualty statistics. "I need to see the training facility," she said finally. "Does that mean you're accepting the mission?" "It means I'm not making a decision based on theoretical specifications and audio recordings. If you want me to fly an experimental aircraft into whatever Captain Torres encountered, I need to understand exactly what I'd be dealing with." "Colonel." Rodriguez was quiet for a moment. "Ms. Mitchell, once you visit the facility and undergo the security briefing, you're committed to the program whether you accept the mission or not. The information you'd be exposed to cannot be unlearned." Sarah looked out her window at the darkened airport. A security light illuminated the windsock, hanging limp in the still night air. Everything about the scene spoke of safety, predictability, normalcy. Where's the facility? Groom Lake, Nevada. We can have transportation arranged for you tomorrow. Afternoon. Groom Lake, Area 51. Sarah had heard the rumors about the classified test facility, but she'd never expected to receive an invitation to visit it personally. How long would the evaluation take? 48 hours minimum. You'd undergo psychological testing, physical evaluation, and preliminary exposure to the X-47 Delta systems. If you're compatible with the neural interface technology, we'd proceed with the full training program. Sarah realized she was at a crossroads that would define the rest of her life. She could decline the colonel's offer, return to her peaceful existence as a flight instructor, and hope that someone else would solve the mystery of the missing aircraft. Or she could step back into a world of classified programs, experimental technology, and missions that pushed the boundaries of human understanding. Colonel, I want to speak with someone who's familiar with the Bermuda Triangle phenomenon from a scientific perspective, not just military intelligence. That can be arranged. Dr. Emily Harrison at MIT has been consulting on the project. She's one of the world's leading experts on electromagnetic anomalies and their effects on navigation systems. How soon can I speak with her? She's flying to Groom Lake tomorrow. You could meet with her as part of your evaluation process. Sarah made her decision with the same instinctive certainty that had guided her through combat missions. She didn't fully understand the risks, couldn't predict the outcome, but her training told her that some situations required action despite uncertainty. Arrange the transportation, Colonel. I'll be ready tomorrow afternoon. Ms. Mitchell, I want to be clear about what you're committing to. If you're compatible with the X-47 Delta systems and complete the training program, you'd be expected to fly the recovery mission within 72 hours. The expanding field means we can't afford to wait for optimal conditions. Understood. One more question. What happens if I don't come back? Colonel Rodriguez was quiet for several seconds. Officially, you'll have died in a training accident involving classified aircraft. Your family will receive full military honors and benefits. Unofficially, we'll have lost our best hope of understanding what happened to Captain Torres and recovering technology that could determine the future of American air superiority. After ending the call, Sarah walked through her apartment, looking at the life she'd built over the past 5 years. Photographs from her military service hung alongside pictures of successful flight students. Her bookshelf contained technical manuals, aviation histories, and novels she'd been meaning to read. The refrigerator held takeout containers and a bottle of wine she'd been saving for a special occasion that had never arrived. It was the life of someone who'd found peace after experiencing too much conflict, who'd chosen simplicity after dealing with overwhelming complexity. But it was also the life of someone hiding from the world's problems rather than confronting them. Sarah spent the night reading through the X-47 Delta manual, absorbing technical details and operational procedures. The aircraft represented the cutting edge of human aerospace technology, incorporating advances that pushed the boundaries of physics and engineering. Flying it would be the challenge of a lifetime, assuming she survived the training program. At dawn, she drove to Riverside Municipal Airport for what might be her final day as a civilian flight instructor. Frank arrived early, as usual, carrying his thermos of coffee and wearing the expression of someone who'd spent a sleepless night worrying about an employee. How did the meeting go yesterday? Sarah chose her words carefully. The government has offered me a temporary consulting position. It would require extended travel and couldn't discuss the details. Frank studied her face with the perception of someone who'd spent 40 years reading people under stress. This isn't about paperwork from your discharge, is it? No, it's not. Are you going to take the job? Sarah looked across the airport at the aircraft waiting for their morning lessons. Marcus Chun's Cessna 172 sat in its usual parking spot, fueled and ready for another session of pattern work and radio communications. Jennifer Walsh's preferred aircraft was undergoing its scheduled maintenance, but it would be ready for her. Afternoon emergency procedures lesson. Frank, I need you to take over my students for the next few weeks, maybe longer. Frank's expression grew serious. How dangerous is this consulting job? I honestly don't know. But if something happens to me, make sure Marcus knows he's ready for his check ride. His radio work is getting better every day, and his landings are actually quite good, even if he doesn't think so. And Jennifer? She's got the instincts to be an excellent pilot. Her emergency procedures are already better than some pilots with commercial licenses. Just don't let her rush through the training. She has a tendency to want to move faster than the curriculum allows. Frank nodded slowly. When do you leave? This afternoon. They spent the morning going through student files and discussing training plans. Sarah briefed Frank on each student's progress, their strengths and weaknesses, their individual learning styles and motivational needs. It felt like preparing for a deployment, ensuring continuity of operations in her absence. At noon, a black sedan with government plates arrived at the airport. The driver, a professional-looking woman in a business suit, approached the flight school office. Ms. Mitchell? I'm Agent Lisa Chambers. I'm here to escort you to your appointment. Sarah gathered her overnight bag and the classified manual. Frank walked her to the car, his expression troubled but supportive. Be careful, Sarah. Whatever this is about, remember that you've got people here who care about what happens to you. I'll remember. As the sedan pulled away from Riverside Municipal Airport, Sarah watched the familiar buildings and aircraft shrink in the rearview mirror. In a few hours, she would be at one of the most classified facilities in the United States, evaluating technology that challenged the laws of physics and preparing for a mission that could either save American air superiority or add her name to the list of pilots who'd vanished into the unknown. The Nevada desert stretched endlessly beyond the sedan's tinted windows, a landscape so desolate it seemed like another planet. Agent Chambers had maintained professional silence for most of the 4-hour drive from Las Vegas, speaking only to confirm their arrival time and security protocols. Sarah used the time to study the X-47 Delta manual, memorizing system specifications and emergency procedures. As they approached the checkpoint, Sarah saw her first glimpse of the legendary facility. Guard towers rose from the desert floor like mechanical sentinels, their surfaces bristling with sensors and communication arrays. The perimeter fence stretched beyond the horizon, topped with razor wire and warning signs that left no doubt about the consequences of unauthorized entry. The security process was thorough and methodical. Sarah surrendered her personal belongings, submitted to biometric scanning, and signed documents acknowledging her understanding of classification levels that officially didn't exist. A military physician conducted a brief medical examination, checking her vision, reflexes, and cardiovascular response to stress. Colonel Rodriguez met her in a sterile briefing room decorated only with an American flag and a photograph of the current president. He looked tired, as if he hadn't slept since their meeting at Portland International. Miss Mitchell, thank you for coming. Before we proceed, I need to inform you that we've had developments since yesterday. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. What kind of developments? We've received 3 more transmissions from Captain Torres. Each one indicates the temporal displacement field is expanding faster than our initial projections suggested. Colonel Rodriguez activated a wall-mounted display showing a map of the Atlantic Ocean. A red circle marked the original position where contact with the stealth aircraft had been lost. Additional circles in orange and yellow showed the field's projected expansion over time. Based on Captain Torres's reports, the affected area has grown from approximately 100 square miles to over 500 square miles in just 24 hours. If this rate continues, major shipping lanes will be impacted within a week. Sarah studied the projection, her pilot's mind automatically calculating distances and implications. What happens to ships that enter the field? We don't know. Commercial. Traffic has been diverted around the area under the pretense of military exercises, but we can't maintain that cover story indefinitely. And if the expansion reaches coastal areas? Colonel Rodriguez's expression grew even more grave. Theoretical models suggest catastrophic effects. Power grids could fail, communication systems could collapse, and we might see widespread temporal distortions affecting millions of people. The weight of responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders like a familiar burden. During her military career, she'd flown missions where failure meant lost battles or dead comrades. This mission carried implications that dwarfed anything in her previous experience. Colonel, I need to understand something. If this field is expanding so rapidly, what makes you think a single aircraft can make any difference? Because Captain Torres isn't just trapped, she's studying the phenomenon from inside. Her latest transmissions include technical data that suggests the field might be artificially generated rather than naturally occurring. Sarah felt a chill despite the room's controlled temperature. You're saying someone is creating this deliberately. We're saying the electromagnetic signatures don't match any known natural phenomena. The patterns are too regular, too precisely calibrated to be accidental. The implications hit Sarah immediately. If the temporal displacement field was artificially generated, then someone had developed technology that made even the stolen stealth aircraft seem primitive by comparison. The mission wasn't just about recovering lost technology, it was about confronting a threat that could reshape reality itself. Who has that kind of capability? That's what we need to find out. Which brings us to Dr. Harrison. As if summoned by her name, the briefing room door opened to admit a woman in her early 40s wearing a Métis sweatshirt and jeans. Dr. Emily Harrison looked more like a graduate student than one of the world's leading experts on electromagnetic anomalies, but her eyes held the intensity of someone accustomed to wrestling with the fundamental mysteries of physics. Ms. Mitchell, I've been looking forward to meeting you. Colonel Rodriguez tells me you're considering flying into the heart of what might be the most significant scientific phenomenon in human history. Sarah shook Dr. Harrison's hand, noting the firm grip and direct gaze of someone comfortable with dangerous ideas. Doctor, I need to understand what I'd be flying into. The technical specifications suggest capabilities that seem impossible based on known physics. Dr. Harrison smiled, the expression of a teacher about to tackle a complex subject. Let me start with what we know about the Bermuda Triangle region. Despite popular mythology, it's actually one of the most thoroughly studied areas of ocean on Earth due to heavy shipping traffic. She moved to the display and began highlighting different sections of the map. The area sits above several geological features that create unique electromagnetic conditions. Underwater methane deposits, magnetic iron ore formations, and deep ocean currents that generate electrical fields. Under normal circumstances, these factors create minor navigation anomalies that experienced pilots and ship captains learn to compensate for. But something has changed, Sarah observed. Exactly. 3 weeks ago, our monitoring stations detected electromagnetic pulses originating from the region that were orders of magnitude more powerful than anything previously recorded. The patterns suggest artificial amplification of natural phenomena. Dr. Harrison switched to a different view, showing wave frequency analyses and electromagnetic field measurements. Someone has found a way to weaponize the triangle's natural properties, creating a localized distortion in space-time that affects everything from radio communications to gravitational fields. Sarah studied the data, trying to relate it to her practical flying experience. What would that feel like to a pilot flying through it? Based on Captain Torres's transmissions and reports from other pilots who've encountered the edge effects, you'd experience severe disorientation, equipment malfunctions, and temporal displacement. Time might move faster or slower than normal. Distances could appear distorted, and your instruments might show readings that contradict your sensory experience. Is the X-47 Delta designed to handle those conditions? Colonel Rodriguez answered this question. The neural interface technology should help you maintain orientation even when your instruments fail. The AI system can compensate for electromagnetic interference and provide navigation assistance based on quantum positioning rather than traditional GPS or radio beacons. Dr. Harrison leaned forward, her expression serious. Ms. Mitchell, I need to be honest with you about what we're asking. The X-47 Delta incorporates theoretical technology that we've never tested under these specific conditions. The neural interface might be affected by the temporal distortions. The quantum navigation could be compromised by unknown electromagnetic fields, and we have no idea how adaptive camouflage will respond to an environment where the laws of physics appear to be flexible. Sarah appreciated the scientist's candor. Too many military briefings glossed over uncertainties with confident assertions that reality later proved false. What's your professional assessment of the mission's chances for success? Dr. Harrison was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing her words carefully. If this was a natural phenomena, I'd say the chances were reasonable. The X-47 Delta systems are designed to handle extreme conditions, and your experience suggests you can adapt to unusual situations. But if the field is artificially generated, then we're dealing with technology that's decades ahead of anything in our current inventory. Which means you'd be flying a cutting-edge experimental aircraft against an unknown adversary who's already demonstrated the ability to trap one of our most advanced pilots in what amounts to a localized alternate reality. The room fell silent. Sarah looked at the map displaying the expanding temporal field, imagining Captain Torres trapped somewhere in that red zone, experiencing time at a different rate while studying phenomena that challenged human understanding of the universe. I want to see the X-47 Delta, Sarah said finally. Colonel Rodriguez nodded. Dr. Harrison will accompany us to the hangar. She's been working with the development team to optimize the aircraft systems for the specific conditions you'll encounter. They walked through corridors lined with photographs of experimental aircraft from the past 7 decades. Sarah recognized some of the designs from aviation history books: the U-2 spy plane, the SR-71 Blackbird, the F-117 stealth fighter. Each represented a leap in technology that had seemed impossible until dedicated teams of engineers and test pilots made it reality. The hangar was larger than Sarah had expected, its ceiling disappearing into shadows above banks of powerful lights. But the X-47 Delta dominated the space with its alien geometry and surfaces that seemed to bend light around them. Up close, the aircraft looked even more otherworldly than the photographs had suggested. The design was angular yet flowing, as if someone had sculpted an aircraft from crystallized lightning. The surfaces shifted subtly as Sarah walked around it, the adaptive camouflage responding to changes in viewing angle and ambient lighting. She could see her reflection distorted in the metamaterial skin, fragmented into impossible geometries. The neural interface headset is integrated into the pilot's helmet, Dr. Harrison explained, showing Sarah the modified flight gear. Thousands of microsensors monitor brainwave patterns and translate cognitive intentions into flight control. Inputs. Sarah examined the helmet, noting the hair-thin wires embedded in the interior padding. During her F-16 career, she'd worn helmets loaded with communication gear, targeting systems, and night vision equipment. But this represented integration between human and machine that bordered on science fiction. How long does it take for the pilot to adapt to the neural interface? For someone with your experience, probably 6 to 8 hours of simulation time. The AI learns your thought patterns and adjusts its interpretation algorithms to match your cognitive style. But Ms. Mitchell, I need to warn you about something. Dr. Harrison's tone became more serious. The neural interface creates a direct connection between your consciousness and the aircraft systems. In the temporal distortion field, where reality itself appears unstable, that connection might amplify any psychological effects you experience. You could find yourself unable to distinguish between your thoughts and the AI's responses. Sarah nodded, understanding the implications. The technology that was supposed to give her an advantage might also make her more vulnerable to whatever psychological effects had impacted other pilots. Have you considered the possibility that Captain Torres isn't trapped at all? Both Colonel Rodriguez and Dr. Harrison stared at her. What do you mean? The colonel asked. I mean, what if she's not trying to escape? What if she's staying in the field deliberately because she's learned something that makes leaving dangerous or impossible? Dr. Harrison exchanged glances with Colonel Rodriguez. That's an interesting theory. What makes you think that? Her transmissions. She says she's unable to return due to the temporal displacement field, but she also specifically warns against sending rescue attempts. Someone who wanted to be rescued would be asking for help, not trying to prevent it. Sarah walked closer to the X-47 Delta, studying the seamless integration of advanced technologies. The aircraft represented humanity's most sophisticated attempt to push the boundaries of flight, but she was beginning to suspect it might not be sophisticated enough for what they were asking it to do. There's something else that bothers me, she continued. If this field is artificially generated, why hasn't whoever created it tried to communicate with us? If they wanted to demonstrate their capabilities or make demands, trapping one of our aircraft would be an effective way to get our attention. Colonel Rodriguez frowned. You think they're trying to send a message? I think Captain Torres might be the message. She's been allowed to send transmissions, allowed to stay alive, allowed to study the phenomenon. That suggests her captors want her to learn something specific. Dr. Harrison nodded slowly. That would explain why the field is expanding in such a controlled manner. If this was purely defensive, they would have simply destroyed the aircraft when it entered their territory. Sarah felt pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to fit together, but the complete picture remained frustratingly elusive. Whatever was happening in the Bermuda Triangle involved technology and intentions that challenged her understanding of both warfare and physics. Colonel, I'll do the mission, but I want to modify the approach. How? Instead of trying to extract Captain Torres and the aircraft, I want to establish communication with whoever is controlling the field. If they wanted us dead, we'd already be dead. They're trying to tell us something, and I think the only way to find out what that is involves going there and asking directly. Colonel Rodriguez looked troubled. Ms. Mitchell, that's not a rescue mission anymore. That's a diplomatic contact with an unknown entity using technology we don't understand. Sir, with respect, I don't think we have any other choice. The field is expanding whether we understand it or not. Captain Torres is trapped whether we mount a rescue or not. And whoever is behind this has already demonstrated they can neutralize our most advanced technology. Sarah looked at the X-47 Delta, its alien surfaces reflecting the hangar lights in patterns that seemed to shift with her heartbeat. The only question is whether we're going to react out of fear and try to fight something we don't understand, or whether we're going to approach this as a contact scenario and try to learn what they want to teach us. The neural interface calibration process felt like having her consciousness dissected and rebuilt one thought at a time. Sarah sat in the X-47 Delta's cockpit while Dr. Harrison monitored brainwave patterns on banks of displays that lined the hangar wall. The helmet's microsensors mapped her neural pathways with precision that bordered on invasive, learning to distinguish between conscious commands and involuntary mental noise. Think about banking left, Dr. Harrison instructed through the communication. System.Sarah visualized the maneuver and immediately felt the aircraft's control surfaces respond. The sensation was unlike anything she'd experienced during 2 decades of flying. The X-47 Delta seemed to anticipate her intentions before she fully formed them, translating thought into action with unsettling smoothness. Now try something more complex. Imagine executing a combat role while climbing at maximum thrust. The aircraft systems hummed to life around her, preparing for a maneuver that existed only in her imagination. Sarah could feel the neural interface learning her cognitive patterns, adapting its responses to match her piloting instincts. After 6 hours of calibration, the boundary between her thoughts and the aircraft's capabilities had blurred to an almost uncomfortable degree. "Colonel," Rodriguez's voice crackled through the hangar speakers. "Ms. Mitchell, we've received another transmission from Captain Torres. This one includes coordinates and what appears to be a detailed analysis of the temporal field structure." Sarah removed the neural interface helmet and climbed down from the cockpit. Her legs felt unsteady after hours of mental integration with the aircraft systems. Dr. Harrison was studying readouts that showed her brainwave patterns overlaid with the X-47 Delta's response algorithms. "How did the calibration look?" Sarah asked. "Remarkable. Your neural patterns adapted to the interface faster than any test pilot we've worked with. The AI system is already predicting your flight inputs with 97% accuracy." They gathered around a secure terminal where Colonel Rodriguez was reviewing Captain Torres's latest message. The transmission quality was clearer than previous communications, suggesting the pilot had found a way to boost her signal strength. Day 28. Have established communication with the entity controlling the temporal displacement field. It's not human in origin, but demonstrates advanced understanding of human psychology and technology. The field expansion is not aggressive, it's protective. Something is coming, and they're trying to prepare us. Sarah felt goosebumps rise on her arms. Something is coming? Colonel Rodriguez continued playing the transmission. Captain Torres's voice remained steady, professional, but carried an undertone of urgency that hadn't been present in earlier messages. The entity calls itself the Navigator. It exists in multiple dimensional states simultaneously and has been observing human technological development for centuries. The temporal field was created in response to detecting what it describes as a convergence event, something that will fundamentally alter the relationship between Earth and the rest of the galaxy. Dr. Harrison leaned forward, her scientific curiosity overriding her obvious concern. "Did she specify what kind of convergence event?" the recording continued. "Navigator indicates that humanity's advancement in stealth technology, artificial intelligence, and quantum mechanics has reached a threshold that will attract attention from less benevolent entities. The temporal field serves as both a test and a protective barrier evaluating whether our species is ready for broader galactic contact while shielding us from those who would exploit our relative technological inferiority." Sarah exchanged glances with Colonel Rodriguez and Dr. Harrison. The implications of Captain Torres's report challenged every assumption they'd made about the mission. "The stealth aircraft that brought me here wasn't captured, it was invited. Navigators needed to study our most advanced technology to determine if we possess the capability to defend ourselves against what's coming. My conclusion, we're not ready, but we have potential." The transmission crackled with static before Torres's voice returned, more urgent now. "I'm sending detailed technical specifications for upgrades that could give us a fighting chance. But understand this, the temporal field will collapse in 72 hours whether we're ready or not. When it does, we'll be visible to entities that view Earth as either a threat to be eliminated or a resource to be harvested." Silence filled the hangar as the recording ended. Sarah stared at the X-47 Delta, its adaptive surfaces shifting subtly in the changing light. The aircraft represented humanity's most sophisticated achievement in aviation technology, but according to Captain Torres, it might be inadequate for the challenges they were about to face. "Colonel, Are we really expected to base a response to potential galactic contact on the word of a pilot who's been trapped in a temporal anomaly for nearly a month? Ms. Mitchell, at this point Captain Torres has more direct intelligence about the situation than anyone else on Earth, and frankly, her technical specifications check out. The upgrade she's recommending would make the X-47 Delta significantly more capable. Dr. Harrison was studying data streams on her tablet, her expression growing increasingly amazed. These modifications, they're theoretically sound but decades ahead of our current capabilities. Whoever this navigator entity is, it understands our technology better than we do. Sarah walked back to the X-47 Delta and placed her hand on its metamaterial skin. The surface felt warm, almost alive, responding to her touch with subtle color. Shifts. If Captain Torres was correct, this aircraft would soon carry her into the unknown, not as a rescue pilot, but as humanity's first ambassador to a galactic community they weren't prepared to join. What exactly are the recommended upgrades? Dr. Harrison consulted her notes. Enhanced neural interface protocols that would allow the pilot to process information at superhuman speeds. Weapon systems that manipulate electromagnetic fields rather than relying on conventional explosives. And most significantly, a quantum communication array that would allow instantaneous contact across any distance. How long would the modifications take? Colonel Rodriguez checked his watch. If we mobilize every available technician and work around the clock, we could have the aircraft ready in 48 hours. That leaves 24 hours before the temporal field collapses. Sarah felt the weight of impossible decisions settling on her shoulders. Accept the modifications, and she'd be flying technology that had never been tested under combat conditions. Refuse them, and she'd be facing unknown threats with inadequate equipment. There's something else, Colonel Rodriguez continued. The navigator has agreed to a face-to-face meeting, but only with the pilot who will be flying the upgraded X-47 Delta. Captain Torres has provided coordinates for a rendezvous point at the center of the temporal field. A meeting with a non-human entity that exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously, Sarah said. Just to be clear about what we're discussing. According to Captain Torres, the navigator can assume a form that human consciousness can comprehend. But Ms. Mitchell, I need to emphasize that this goes far beyond any mission parameters we've ever contemplated. You'd be making first contact with an alien intelligence under circumstances we can't predict or control. Sarah looked around the hangar at the teams of technicians who were already beginning to modify the X-47 Delta based on Captain Torres's specifications. They worked with the focused intensity of people who understood that humanity's future might depend on their precision and speed. What does the navigator want from this meeting? According to Captain Torres, it wants to evaluate whether humanity deserves protection or represents a threat that needs to be contained. Our response to this situation will determine how Earth is perceived by the galactic community. Dr. Harrison looked up from her calculations. Ms. Mitchell, if even half of what Captain Torres is reporting is accurate, we're facing the most significant moment in human history. The navigator's assessment could determine whether our species joins a galactic civilization or faces isolation or worse. Sarah had flown combat missions where the stakes seemed impossibly high, where failure meant losing battles or sacrificing lives. But those missions had operated within the familiar framework of human conflict, using weapons and tactics that were extensions of centuries of military evolution. This mission required her to represent the entire human species in negotiations. With an intelligence that viewed reality from perspectives she couldn't begin to imagine. Colonel, I need to ask a direct question. Do you believe Captain Torres is still mentally competent? The stress of extended isolation in an anomalous temporal field could cause hallucinations, false memories, or complete psychological breakdown. We've had 3 psychiatrists analyze her transmissions. The consensus is that she's demonstrating Remarkable psychological stability under extreme conditions. Her technical reports are detailed, internally consistent, and contain information that no human could have fabricated. Sarah nodded, accepting the assessment while maintaining healthy skepticism. Military psychiatrists were skilled at evaluating pilot fitness, but they'd never dealt with someone trapped in a localized distortion of spacetime. The next 36 hours passed in a blur of modifications, system tests, and briefings that stretched the boundaries of human knowledge. The X-47 Delta was transformed from an advanced stealth aircraft into something that resembled the product of alien engineering. Its metamaterial skin now incorporated quantum field manipulators that could bend electromagnetic radiation in ways that made conventional stealth technology seem primitive. The neural interface underwent extensive upgrades that would allow Sarah to process sensory input and make decisions at speeds approaching those of the aircraft's AI systems. Dr. Harrison warned that the enhanced interface might cause permanent changes to her neural architecture. But the alternative seemed worse. On the morning of the mission, Sarah stood in the pre-flight briefing room looking at satellite imagery of the temporal field. The anomalous region had continued expanding, now covering nearly 2,000 square miles of ocean. Commercial shipping had been diverted hundreds of miles from the area, causing significant disruption to Atlantic trade routes. "Once you enter the field, we'll lose all communication until you emerge," Colonel Rodriguez explained. "The quantum communication array should allow contact with Captain Torres and potentially with the navigator, but we won't be able to monitor your status or provide support." Sarah nodded, understanding that she'd be completely on her own once the mission began. The X-47 Delta's extended range would allow her to reach the rendezvous coordinates and return, assuming the aircraft's modifications functioned as designed and assuming she survived the encounter with the navigator. "What's the contingency plan if I don't return?" "Officially, there isn't one. Unofficially, we'll wait 20 hours after your expected return time, then begin preparing for the collapse of the temporal field and whatever follows." Sarah walked to the hangar where the modified X-47 Delta waited under banks of brilliant lights. The aircraft's appearance had changed subtly during the modification process, its surfaces now displaying patterns that seemed to shift based on viewing angle and mental focus. Technicians were conducting final systems checks, their movements careful and deliberate. Dr. Harrison approached carrying the upgraded neural interface helmet. The device looked heavier than the original version, its interior lined with additional sensors and microprocessors that would allow direct interface with the quantum communication systems. "Sarah, I want you to know that regardless of what happens out there, you're carrying the hopes and fears of the entire human species. But more importantly, you're carrying our curiosity and our desire to understand our place in the universe." Sarah accepted the helmet, feeling its weight both physical and metaphorical. In a few hours, she'd be flying into conditions that no human had ever experienced, representing a species that was about to learn whether it was alone in the galaxy or part of something much larger and more complex. As she climbed into the X-47 Delta's cockpit for the final time, Sarah thought about her students back at Riverside Municipal Airport. Marcus Chun, still working on his crosswind landings. Jennifer Walsh, preparing for her medical supply missions. Frank Morrison, sharing his love of aviation with the next generation of pilots. They represented the peaceful side of flight, the joy of soaring through familiar skies toward known destinations. Sarah was about to fly toward something unprecedented, carrying the responsibility for determining what kind of universe those students would inherit. The X-47 Delta systems came online with whisper-quiet efficiency. The neural interface synchronized with her brainwaves, creating the now familiar sensation of the aircraft becoming an extension of her consciousness. But the upgraded systems felt different, more responsive, as if the boundary between pilot and machine had dissolved almost completely. As she taxied toward the runway, Sarah's final thought before takeoff was surprisingly simple. Whatever waited for her in the temporal field, she would meet it as both a representative of humanity and as a pilot who had learned to find peace in the sky, even when the sky led toward the unknown. The X-47 Delta lifted off into the Nevada dawn, its adaptive surfaces already beginning to bend light around its revolutionary form. Behind her, the most classified facility on Earth continued its work of pushing the boundaries of human possibility. Ahead of her lay an ocean where reality operated by different rules, where time moved at variable speeds, and where an alien intelligence waited to determine humanity's fate. Sarah Mitchell, who had been just a flight instructor 48 hours earlier, carried the future of her species toward a rendezvous with the infinite. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.